Welcome to Law Days and Lattes, the podcast where we blend the world of law and business with a warm cup of information and common sense. I'm your host, Sidney Wheelan, attorney, real estate investor, and business owner. Each week, we'll be your go-to source for legal insights, business advice, and so much more. Whether you're a seasoned professional, an ambitious entrepreneur, or simply someone seeking guidance, we'll have you covered. From navigating the legal landscape to empowering you with valuable business strategies, we'll explore the legal side of life and enjoy a virtual latte along the way. So, grab your favorite latte, get comfortable, and let's dive in to Law Days and Lattes. Welcome back to Law Days and Lattes, the podcast where we talk about law, business, wealth, and legacy in a way that actually makes sense. I'm your host, Sidney Wheelan, founder of the Wheelan Law Firm, serving North Central Missouri businesses and families in 3 convenient locations, Moberly, Carrollton, and Paris. I was sitting in court earlier today, and I had just listened to another family fight. It's one of those cases that makes you take a deep breath and think, how did we get here? Because this wasn't a dispute between strangers. It wasn't a business deal gone bad. It wasn't 2 people who had never liked each other. It was family. And at the center of the dispute was the death of a woman who had been the matriarch of that family, a mother and a grandmother, someone who had spent decades building a life and a family. And now, after her death, the people she left behind are sitting in a courtroom arguing over what she wanted. Who gets what? Who said what? Who was promised what? Who was supposed to be in charge? And as I listened, I couldn't help but think, this is not how she would have wanted this story to end. And that's really what I want to talk to you about today. Not wills, not trusts, not probate or taxes, not even estate planning, really. I want to talk about family, because after doing this work for a long time, I've come to believe that one of the greatest gifts you can give your family isn't necessarily money. It's clarity. The thing about families are complicated. We all know that. We love each other and we irritate each other. We have old stories, old wounds, old misunderstandings. And sometimes, without even realizing it, we carry those things with us for decades. Maybe one child stayed close to home and helped take care of mom. Another moved away. Maybe one child has always been the responsible one. Another has always been the one who needed a little more help. Maybe there was a business, or a farm, or a house that had been in the family for generations. Maybe mom had told each of them something different at different times. And maybe she fully intended to get everything written down someday, but she never did. Or maybe she did have a will, but it was 15 years old, and nobody really knew about it. Or maybe everybody knew about it, but nobody had ever actually talked about what it meant. And then one day, mom dies. And suddenly, all of those family dynamics come rushing to the surface. But mom told me. I've heard some version of this so many times. But mom told me I could have the house. She told me the farm was mine. She promised me the jewelry. She said I was going to be the executor. She told me she wanted us to split everything equally. And here's the heartbreaking part. Sometimes everyone is telling the truth, not necessarily because mom intentionally misled anyone, but because conversations change and circumstances change. People remember things differently. And what seemed like a harmless conversation around the kitchen table 5 or 10 years ago suddenly becomes incredibly important after someone's gone. And then there is no one left to ask, Mom, what did you mean? The conversation that could have changed everything. I've often wondered how many family lawsuits could be avoided if people simply had the difficult conversations while everyone was alive. Imagine mom sitting down with her 3 kids. Maybe she's 75. Maybe she's perfectly healthy. There's no crisis. Nobody is in the hospital and nobody is dying. They're just sitting around the kitchen table. And mom says, I want to tell you what I've decided. I want Sarah to have the house. John is going to get the farm because he's the one who's been working on it. Mary isn't interested in the farm, so I'm leaving her other assets. I've named your brother as trustee. And I want you all to understand that I've tried to be fair, even if everything isn't exactly equal. Now, would everybody necessarily agree? Probably not. Families are families, but they would have the opportunity to ask questions, to try to understand, and to disagree while mom is still sitting at the table. And mom could explain herself. She could say, this is why I made this decision. Or, I know this isn't exactly what you expected, but this is what I believe is right. That conversation might be uncomfortable, but uncomfortable is not necessarily bad. Sometimes a little discomfort today prevents enormous pain tomorrow. Let's talk about the farm. This is particularly important when we're talking about family farms and businesses. I see this one a lot. Mom and dad have spent 40 or 50 years building something. Maybe it's a farm. Maybe it's a family business. Maybe it's a piece of property that has been in the family forever. And they say, oh, our kids will work it out. Please don't do that. Because working it out may sound reasonable when everyone is healthy and getting along. But after mom and dad are gone, it can become a completely different conversation. One child may say, I'm not selling the farm. And another says, well, I want my share. And the third says, I don't care what happens to the farm. I just want my inheritance. And now you've taken something that was supposed to be a family legacy and turned it into an asset that has to be divided. Sometimes the only way to divide it is to sell it. And suddenly, the land that mom and dad worked their entire lives to preserve is gone. Not because anybody was evil, and not because the children didn't love their parents, but because nobody had the conversation. And remember, equal doesn't always mean fair. Here's another difficult conversation. Sometimes parents tell me, I want everything to be equal. And I understand that. But equal isn't the same thing as fair. Maybe one child has been running the family business for 20 years. Maybe another child has never worked a day in the business. Maybe one child has already received significant financial help. Maybe another has provided years of caregiving. Maybe one child wants the farm and another wants cash. Fairness sometimes requires a conversation about what fair actually means. And that's something I would much rather see families discuss around a kitchen table than argue about in a courtroom. And then there's the other stuff. Here's something else I've learned. Sometimes it's not the big things that cause the biggest fights. It's the little things. Mom's jewelry, dad's guns, the old pickup truck, the family photographs, the recipe box, the Christmas decorations, the quilt that grandma made, the dining room table where everybody ate Thanksgiving dinner. Those things may have very little monetary value, but they can have enormous emotional value. And when somebody dies, those objects become symbols. I wanted mom's wedding ring. You knew I wanted that quilt. Dad promised me that truck. And suddenly you're fighting over a $200 piece of furniture because it represents something worth far more than $200. It represents mom. It represents dad. And it represents home. Now keep in mind, your family doesn't need a perfect plan. I don't want you listening to this thinking you need to have a $5 million estate or a complicated trust to justify having a plan. You don't. You need a plan that fits your family. Maybe it's a simple will. Maybe it is a trust. Maybe it's beneficiary designations. Maybe it's a power of attorney. Maybe it's a conversation with your children. Usually, it's some combination of all those things. But here's the thing I want you to remember. The documents are only part of the plan. Your family needs to know what you've done. They need to know where to find things. They need to know who to call. And sometimes they need to know why you've made the decisions you've made. Let's talk about the legacy you leave. I've been thinking a lot lately about the phrase legacy in motion, because your legacy isn't something that begins when you die. It's already moving. It's happening right now. It's in the way you raise your children. It's in the businesses you build. It's in the land you take care of. It's in the values you teach and the stories you tell. It's in the traditions you continue. And eventually, it's in what you leave behind. But here's something I want you to think about. What if your greatest legacy isn't what you leave your family, but what you prevent them from losing? Maybe you prevent them from losing the family farm. Maybe you prevent them from losing a business. Maybe you prevent them from losing a relationship with a sibling. Maybe you prevent them from spending years and thousands of dollars fighting over something that could have been resolved with one conversation. Maybe that's part of your legacy too. I'm going to give you some homework today, and it's not very complicated. Go home, make a cup of coffee or your favorite latte, sit down with the person you love and start talking. Ask, if something happened to you tomorrow, would I know what to do? Or ask, where are your important documents? Who is your power of attorney? What do you want to happen to the house? What about the farm? What about the business? What about your personal belongings? And maybe most importantly, is there anything you want me to understand about your wishes? You don't have to solve everything in one conversation. You don't even have to have all the answers, but just start. Because sometimes the hardest part is simply opening the door. And back to the courtroom scene that I witnessed earlier. That's what I'm thinking about as I sit here today. There's a family in this courtroom, a family that is grieving, a family that has lost its matriarch. And instead of sitting around a kitchen table telling stories about her, they're sitting in a courtroom arguing about her estate. I certainly don't know everything about this family. I don't know what happened behind closed doors, and I certainly don't know what their mother intended. But I do know this. This is heartbreaking, and it reminds me why I do what I do. Estate planning isn't really about death. It's about life. It's about the life you've built, the people you love, the things you've worked for, the values you want to pass on, and the relationships you hope will survive you. So please, get your affairs in order. Talk to your family, put your wishes in writing, keep your documents updated, and don't assume that everyone knows what you want. Tell them, because someday you're going to leave this world. And when you do, you can't control everything that happens afterward. But you can give your family something incredibly valuable: clarity. You can give them a roadmap. You can give them peace. You can give them the ability to grieve without also having to solve a mystery. And you can give them the opportunity to remember you for the life you lived instead of remembering the fight that happened after you were gone. That's what legacy is really about. So build it, protect it, and pass it on. And whatever you do, don't let the courthouse be where your family story continues. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Law Days and Lattes. If today's conversation made you think about your own family or someone else's, I'd love for you to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share this episode with others who could learn along the way. I'll see you next time on Law Days and Lattes. Have a great week, my friends.
This podcast episode contains general information for discussion purposes only. Each case is different and must be judged on its own merits. Missouri rules generally prohibit lawyers from advertising that they specialize in particular areas of the law. This show should not be construed to suggest such specialization. Nothing on this show should be taken as legal advice for any individual case or situation. This information is not intended to create an attorney-client relationship, and the listening or viewing of this podcast does not constitute an attorney-client relationship. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely upon advertisements.